Well, we both guessed right, Zach.
We did.
On our most recent Cardinals Cover 2, presented by Hyundai, proud partner of the Arizona Cardinals. The last one before the draft on Wednesday, we both predicted defense, line of scrimmage, front seven, but it was line of scrimmage. Not only line of scrimmage defense, but interior line of scrimmage defense with Walter Nolen. 6'4", 296 pounds, bench press 27 reps, 20-yard shuttle 4.76. This guy is, as our social media team has labeled him, a Mississippi menace.
Which I liked. He labeled himself as a unicorn. That's what he's able to bring to the table. And the Arizona Cardinals, they spent a lot of the offseason working on reinforcing the trenches. You bring in guys like Josh Sweat coming off the edge, Dalvin Tomlinson, Calais Campbell, and now Walter Nolen gets to learn from those two guys specifically on the interior defensive line. He's played all across the D-line at Ole Miss. Excited to see what the Arizona Cardinals do with him.
In 2024, his first and only season at Ole Miss after transferring from Texas A&M, a first-team AP All-American, first-team All-SEC selection, a career-high 14 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks. He was invited to the Senior Bowl, where Daniel Jeremiah listed him as one of his standouts. Quote, Nolan's twitch and burst are rare for a player of his size. And again, that's what you want. Someone who's got that mobility along that line of scrimmage. And you brought it up. Yes, it's another defensive lineman. It's another defensive tackle. But I'll say it again, as we discussed going into the draft, not a surprise because of the fact that, yeah, you win games, lose games at the line of scrimmage. And that was one area that we thought needed an upgrade going into this season.
Into the season, and once again, with the reinforcements that they brought in throughout free agency, there was a question as to whether the Cardinals would go edge, if they would now go best player available. And I think, truthfully, they did both. They got interior defensive line help, and they got one of the best players available in the draft class. There were a lot of experts in mock drafts that had Walter Nolen going way above 16, and sometimes even in the top 10. So to see him now land in the Valley, knowing what he's able to do, he's an explosive player. And even though he transferred from Texas A&M, he was talking about it in his draft interview that we just had with the local media. And he was saying how he didn't really feel like he was being utilized the best. So he goes over to Ole Miss and he puts up All-American numbers. He's an explosive player, quick twitch, and it's somebody that will make an impact come day one with the Arizona Cardinals.
You look at the defensive tackle selected ahead of Nolan. Mason Graham was the first one off the board, going number 5 to Cleveland, which had worked out a deal with the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jacksonville Jaguars selected 2nd overall. And then the next defensive tackle all the way at pick 13, Kenneth Grant, going to the Miami Dolphins. So Nolan, again, the 3rd defensive tackle off the board. We've been talking about it a lot since the end of the regular season going into this draft process, how deep this draft class was at defensive line / edge. But defensive tackle, again, that interior pressure up the middle, I think is something that didn't see a lot of on a consistent basis last season from this Cardinals team. But now you've got not only Josh Sweat on the outside, but you got, knock on wood, a healthy Darius Robinson, Justin Jones, Bilal Nichols. You bring in Dalvin Tomlinson. You re-sign L.J. Collier. By the way, Calais Campbell is back. And that, I think, is key with Campbell being in that room now, because you have the savvy vet and now a young pup, if you will, in Walter Nolen, who acknowledged as such on the conference call that, yeah, there are a lot of veterans in that room that he can now learn from.
And he wants to be a sponge. It was funny because during the draft process, he had an interview and he said that he is the next Aaron Donald, and that's somebody that he looks up to. So when you have a player that is eager to want to look up to some veteran leadership, that is something that's key. And he was talking about how there are some character concerns about him, and something he appreciated about the Arizona Cardinals was they were the one team, and this is a direct quote, that they were the one team that genuinely wanted to get to know him. And that is something that's very impressive. It's not a surprise when you get to know Jonathan Gannon and Monty Ossenfort, considering when they have their checklist, they want a good person first, a good player second, and what their role is going to be at number 3. So now they know they went straight to the source, and Walter Nolen said, I'm a straight shooter. So I appreciated that they did that. I know Nick Saban on the ESPN show was saying that when he wants to play football, Walter Nolen disputed that right away and said, no, I do want to play football. I love playing this game. And when I hang up those cleats, I want to be remembered as being one of the greats, and having that Boston can and that gold jacket, something in a place where Aaron Donald is going to end up. So I'm excited for Walter Nolen, because to have guys like Calais Campbell and Dalvin Tomlinson, that room at the end of the season did not look anything remotely close to where it's currently at.
Those negative things and the reaction that we asked him about what has been said about him. And again, when you go through this draft process, it's about how do you nitpick a lot of the things, because these are all talented young players. But Nolan's quote, "Time to show everybody they wrong." And again, now the onus is on him. But I like what you said as far as the 30 visit and how important that must have been. And we'll hear from general manager Monty Ossenfort and head coach Jonathan Gann a little bit later on, and then we'll come back and react to what they had to say. But you look at, okay, maybe there are some question marks as far as the person is concerned. So what do? You bring them into the building for a 30 visit, and you have that conversation face-to-face. Okay, that checks the box. Now we go back to the tape. How good of a player is Walter Nolen? Well, he's a top 5 defensive tackle, at least among the experts. Now all of a sudden it's okay, that checks another box. Now you figure out what role. And yeah, it's a loaded defensive line room. But what happens here in April, things can change between now and when the team gets out there on the field in September.
Mason Graham is the consensus number 1 defensive tackle in this draft class. When you go to defensive tackle number 2, it was a toss-up between Kenneth Grant and Walter Nolen, especially when I was doing these mock draft trackers on azcardinals.com. Every single week, you would have a handful of experts that selected Kenneth Grant at number 16. You had a handful of experts that selected Walter Nolen at pick number 16. I know that those experts are very happy right now that they got the pick correct. But when it comes down to it, and we could have the discussion about who's the best defensive tackle in the class and whatnot, when they come back into the facility for rookie minicamp, which I believe is on May 9th, when that kicks off, it doesn't matter where you were drafted. It's a matter of what you bring to the table. And we talk about the role. The role right now, and while he will have an impact come day 1, Walter Nolen that is, he also is going to have a very different role come week 7, week 8. He is going to learn from some of the best that this game has to offer currently. So if you are Walter Nolen, I know you're chomping at the bit to get out there.
NFL Network's Daniel Jeremiah listed Nolen as his 28th ranked overall prospect. Bucky Brooks had Nolen ranked as his 2nd best defensive tackle. Actually mocked Nolen to the Cardinals in both his 2.0 and 3.0 versions. This is what Bucky had to write about Walter Nolen. The high-energy interior defender fits the Cardinals' defensive culture as a worker bee at the point of attack, which doesn't sound like anything that there was a question about his motor. Mm-hmm. And then Bucky wrote this as well. The team's need for a disruptor at the point of attack makes Nolen a sensible selection. The Ole Miss standout is a high-energy playmaker with a relentless approach. End of sentence.
Check.
Yeah.
You get that player now in Walter Nolen. And I keep going back to the veterans in the room, because going into the draft class with Darius Robinson last year, you bring in a defensive lineman. Yes, you have Justin Jones and Bilal Nichols, but those two guys got injured. And Darius Robinson also had a very unfortunate start to his rookie season due to injuries and other circumstances. Walter Nolen is entering a very different room than Darius Robinson did. And also, Darius Robinson and guys like Dante Stills as well, these are 2 young guys that have just recently gone through this process that Walter Nolen's about to experience. He gets to lean on those guys as well.
And there's not going to be a ton of pressure on Walter Nolen to come and produce right away. We know this coaching staff likes to has a rotation along that defensive front, especially along that defensive line now, but based off the talent you have, and we can have this conversation a number of different times between now and training camp.
And we will.
But you have those numbers. Do we see more defensive linemen on the field? Do we see a 4-man front as opposed to a 3-man front because you have the talent in there? And again, knock on wood, everyone stays healthy. Look, it's a good problem to have when you have this much talent, and it's something that Monty Ossenfort mentioned during his pre-draft presser. You never shy away from adding another talented player in a room that might already be loaded with talent because, as we've been talking about, things change between April and September. And again, who's to say maybe Walter Nolen is that guy week 1, whomever it is against, but on the field to start the game, or he's part of a rotation and gets to watch a Calais Campbell, a Dalvin Tomlinson, a Justin Jones, a Bilal Nichols, LJ Collier, guys who have been there and done that.
And we talk about that potential four-man front. He's coming from a 4-2-5 scheme out at Ole Miss. So he lined up all across the defensive line. He was primarily that 3 technique, so similar role to what Dante Stills had, where he would kind of be on the outside of the tackle and close on the interior side of the line. And I think that I was watching a clip back on Twitter after the pick was announced that I believe it was Jacob Wilson, I believe, is the center from Georgia. And look, Georgia's a powerhouse team. We know the trenches on both the offensive side and the defensive side of the line. They have some dogs on that team. And Walter Nolen burst right through the middle and made a tackle right there on the spot because of just the violence and the physicality that he plays the game with, that motor that Nick Rallis craves. So we've seen so many different fronts from Nick Rallis. He's had 1 defensive lineman having his hand in the dirt and 3 edge rushers just having a mad out blitz to the quarterback. You want to have some 4 defensive lineman fronts? Bring it on.
He has put a little bit of a spotlight on himself with the Aaron Donald comparison, yet I don't mind the confidence because I think you do need that to come in and play well at this level. So I don't believe it's because there is that fine line between confidence and cockiness. I do, again, in just the short amount of time that I've seen him on film and then also hearing from him moments ago, I believe it's more of a confidence, not a cockiness as far as how he's coming into the league.
Which is why I made sure to ask him, where does that confidence come from? And he's like, honestly, it's just the kind of person that I am. And he called it a silent confidence, which from what we've heard has been pretty, vocal and loud. So I'm not sure about the silent part of it. But what he said that we cannot disagree with is that he backs it up with what he's put into the game. It's not by mistake that he's the 16th overall pick in the 2025 NFL draft. He was the number 2 rated recruit behind Travis Hunter in his high school class, number 1 defensive tackle, and just seeing how he has been able to go from Texas A&M, where it was that I'm pretty sure Dane Brugler mentioned it here. It was that famous Jimbo Fisher recruiting class where everyone said this is the best recruiting class of all time, and he was the name on that list. And then due to changes, he moves on. Something that I find interesting is he has not been at a place for longer than 2-3 years. In high school, he's moved around. In college, he's moved around. Potentially in the Valley, this could be his long-term home.
His walk-off quote, if you will, during the conference call, by the time I take my cleats off, I want to be one of the best. And again, now the work begins, and he's very excited to come here. Who's also very excited? Well, some of Nolan's new teammates. Buda Baker on social media. I love it. Mac Wilson Sr., win in the trenches. Zaven Collins, let's go. And then the seal of approval from the franchise quarterback, Kyler Murray. Yes, sir. Trench work. And again, that's what you like to see as far as the welcoming from these current Cardinals welcoming the brand new Arizona Cardinals.
Mac Wilson Sr. from Mexico tweeted out, he said, win in the trenches, #BirdGang with a bunch of G's. Kelvin Beachum tweeted out, let's get to work. Welcome to the Valley, Walter Nolan, and gave a shout out to one of his former teammates out there from SMU who was helping, coach him. Look, it is beautiful to see the guys so quickly rally around. When Marvin Harrison Jr. came in, there's that very viral video of Kyler Murray. But to see guys on both the offensive side of the ball and the defensive side of the ball welcoming Walter Nolan, I'm sure they're going to be very excited to see him in the building in a few days.
All right, so just some quick reaction here from the pick of Walter Nolan, selected 16th overall here in the draft. We'll be back a little bit later on after we hear at the conclusion of the first round from both GM Monty Ossenford and head coach Jonathan Gannon, again at the conclusion of the first round. And on that note, Zach, go back to work.
Oh, let us go back to work. Just like Kelvin Beachum said.
We will put a lid on this edition of Cardinals Cover 2 presented by Hyundai, proud partner of the Arizona Cardinals. As always, special thanks to our executive producer, Jim Alejandro, our associate producer, Cody Fincher. For Zach Gershman, I'm Craig Grialou. We'll talk to you next time here on Cardinals Cover 2.